That's hilarious. Yeah, I did. God dang it, I wanted to bring that up. Admit all. Admit all. I did something rotten like that to my stepmom, no, mother-in-law. Whenever my wife and I actually got married before we'd ever had any kids or anything like that, for what was it, Mother's Day or something like that. Um, got her a gift, something about being a grandma or something. Freaked out. Oh my God, no.
Yeah. My brother turns 20 in like 4 days. And I'm like, dude.
That's young. That's
Yeah. He's been with his girlfriend since we were in middle school.
oh wow. That's cool.
She just got told that she couldn't have kids. And then
Boom. Surprise. Yeah. Life's like that. It's one of those things that's uh it's crazy.
I kind of just stared at him. I was like, what? I'm gonna hug? He was like, yeah. I was like, are you feeling well? Are you okay?
Okay. Let's go back and kind of soak in. There's this one, and then there was this one. Yes, okay. All right. Those will come up from the last one because we're going to talk a little bit about government terrorism. And last chapter, I don't think I talked too much about speech. I do want to talk a little bit about its overlaps, so because it won't. We'll talk about some of the different overlaps for that one. Oh my goodness, I think, let's see. I was 24 whenever I had our first. It's one of those things that's crazy. It's now my oldest is 16. He's like this tall. It's like you shouldn't be that old that quick.
Yeah. My little is 4 and he turns 5 in February. He's already like 4 feet tall.
Yeah, it's crazy. It goes by.
Like that's just so weird to me.
Yeah, my next oldest boy, so I got the Claire, and he's about a year younger than Claire, so he's about what is he, 11 now?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 140 pounds, I think, 130 pounds. So he's only like 20, 30 pounds less than me. He's only as tall. He's a little chunk.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh my goodness, that one's trouble. He's the quiet one. He's the one you'll never see him if unless he wants to be seen. And if he's causing trouble, you won't see him. You'll be like, where did this thing go? Just disappear. If he hears you talk too loud, you might hear chuckling in the other room. It's like, oh, little bastard, he took that.
Going somewhere and I'm like, where you going? He's like upstairs and he'll like slowly, because there's like a wall, and he'll slowly like just creep up the stairs, but his head will be like at the bottom of it. I'm like, you were in trouble, buddy.
I'm up to something. All right, it is officially 11 o'clock. Where did I leave off with this last time? I thought we got into crimes against government and terrorism. Did we get into that, or were you still in the last chapter? I don't remember. It's been too many days.
I remember seeing this. So
okay, I remember seeing this. Okay, cool. So I think we just started to move into this, and the big question here, sort of like whenever we're dealing with crimes against the public, it's like, who are we really talking about whenever we deal with the public? Are we talking about the public? Are we talking about the people who act on behalf of it? Or are we talking about the people who act on behalf of it? And by that I mean that last one would be police themselves, kind of thing. Those who have that authority to go in there and enforce these things. So you've got those elements of it. When I say police, it's really just government in general, and you can see that across the different areas when we start talking about this in particular topic of terrorism, or whether talking about, we'll also kind of go back and overlap some of the speech stuff. We didn't go over quite as much in the last chapter, because you'll see where they overlap, because there's been some stuff I've mentioned, I'll show you in here, related to some of those overlaps, because it's something that's very, very, very interesting. It's to some degree, its own classification, its own set of statutes within, state level crimes. When you start getting into how it's handled, though, it can change entire processes. Especially when you start talking about federal crimes, that kind of thing is in, your rights there. Some of them get suspended because of the nature of the crime itself. And so it's one of those tipping points for our structure in society is really what it is. Because it's that need, that real danger, but also on the other end of the spectrum is how we protect those freedoms. I think last time I might have mentioned, you really want to get into it in terms of like how much oversight, how much restriction, how many restrictions can be placed on you. Probably the restriction you start dealing with is privacy. And it's like you can already find massive violations of that across time. If I were to talk about like the 1970s and some of the things that had taken place there, some of the congressional hearings and some of the responses that happened in public, it would be in stark contrast to the things that you see in relation to this topic in the last, last generation, this generation, however you want to look at it, or you want to draw those kind of timelines. All right. So this one, we know these are crimes against government. These are governmental actions that might be interrupted or something related to those, the government itself as an entity. Terrorism being its own subset. Well, we'll talk about that as we go to it. So we started out last time, I think I talked about perjury and bribery. Basically, what you start talking about here is, those statements. When you start talking about words, if we go back to the last chapter, I'll make a foray back just so we can look back at it, see where those lines are in terms of, the impact of one's, we want to say, speech, press, assembly, just words in general, right? So probably the biggest thing I want to maybe ask, because it's a good thing for you guys to kind of think about, is how you look at the impact of words. And then take note that not everybody looks at words the same way. And that's not just in the sense of if I say a particular word, the image that you get in your mind might be a little bit different, but also in terms of that is a question. Violence, right? Because if you look at like the popular sphere, the social sphere, you see that come up as an argument sometimes. The law is where you would really look to see where those lines are drawn. And it's like the different effects that these things have are really what you have that are governed. It's not the words themselves. It's not your ability to say it, right? It's any action or effects that it has. Really, it's the effects, resulting actions usually are what those effects are, right? So if you look at perjury, what you have here is the interruption of, vital governmental processes, which require someone to be honest and truthful. If you don't have that, your government can't operate at all because it's so base level. It's also so base level and so common. We have so many issues with it. We have to regulate it in the way that we do. And it's one of those things that there's a great deal of discretion with it, right? How much do you want to hold someone's feet to the fire for what may be a mischaracterization of a misstatement, right? Because that's what you start dealing with there. And so the lines there are ones you have to draw in the, I guess you'd say here and now for a conversation or an interrogation, question or trial, those types of things. You want to talk about, we won't talk about the bribery aspect of it, but the false swearing element, that's where it's outside of those types of governmental operations. So it's like, it's still something we criminalize. Lies are one of those things that it doesn't really matter where they're at. They have deleterious effects, right? So if you look at those statutes First one we get here is the defense. Okay, whoever in whatever types of questioning make or subscribing of a statement which is required authorized by law makes a statement under oath, legally binding. That the statement is true when in fact it is not believed to be true, knows that it is not true, intends to avoid or obstruct such as guilty of perjury. Defensive charge, as defined in the section, is that the statement is true, right? So the only defense you have there is you're actually having the truth there, so you can argue the facts there, right? If you look on the other side of the spectrum, see, does it have, nope, it goes right into bribery. I didn't grab any false swearing. But you can find false swearing statements where it's talking about same kind of thing, basically anywhere you start getting legally binding where it's not basically court processes, right? Because court processes are held at a different I wouldn't say different level of scrutiny, but they're of greater importance, right? All the processes matter. There's any that matter. So as to determine fact and guilt. We turn to look at speech itself. This is where you talked about this, right? Are words violence? Yes, no, don't know. Not actually going to pull you. Usually I do, but there's only two of you here in class, and then online it'd be trouble for me to try to read it. Yeah, I can make it out, but I don't like to do that unless you guys want to say something. All you need to know is that people fall on both lines of this, right? And there is some place where there are discussions of what it means to use words and to have them incite danger, kind of thing, to have them cause danger in something. Right? Now, here it says Chaplinsky versus New Hampshire, but here we'll talk about the statute. Profane, violent, abusive, insulting language, right? Toward another person, about another person, presence or hearing, which language in common acceptance is calculated to arouse anger of the person who has spoken, right? So what are we talking about here? It can be regular language, it can be profane, but it's done with that purpose of causing someone to become angry. You're trying to elicit that behavior in you, right? Think about insults before barroom brawls, right? Very, very easy to identify. It's like that. Okay. That's one of those things where it itself is not violence. You start playing with the probability that you're going to elicit it in someone else, right? That's what you start dealing with. The other end of the spectrum, what was it down here? 15, was it? 17. Boom. Obscenity. It's what you're saying, obscene, lewd, indecent. It does not just be decent. That can be your language too. It fall usually under the same kinds of things. Your words there. Different ways of communication. Right? Here, you start looking at those effects within government. You can have those effects at the individual level. You can have them at the group level. That's where we were talking about unlawful assemblies, routs, and riots, those types of things. Bribery is pretty straightforward. I think we talked about that one already. Basically, same kind of thing. It has to do with that position that's involved and money. Because money's involved. Yeah, a little bit more serious. Here's where it talks about different people who can be bribed, because you have it across all these different processes. We want to keep these processes running appropriately. So this is how we deal with that. Misconduct, contempt of court. We talked about contempt of court last time. You want to see the I showed you a little bit of that video where it had someone who was held in contempt of court, wasn't ever officially charged with anything. And in fact, at several points in time, it was denied he was even being held. Right? There was even an official response that some of the actions that were taking place towards this person were lies. even though they received official response from other officials related to those things. Right? You can go and find that video if you want, or I can give it to you if you're interested in it. Because that's kind of the example of where those lines are drawn in terms of, in reality, we have all of these processes. At times, though, it can be very easy to turn a blind eye to things. And so, as that happens, you have someone who can purposely turn a blind eye to something. Well, these processes, you see their importance because you see when they're violated. Contempt of court is one that has a large range there of things you can do. Let's take words for a second. So, treason. Treason is when you start moving against a country to whom you belong, or overthrow, that kind of a thing. Only crime listed in the Constitution. Just have that right here. Advocating overthrow of the government by force, penalty. Any person above the age of 18 advocates revolution, teaches, justifies programs, sabotage, force, violation, sedition, treason, directly or indirectly advocates, teaches, or means overthrow by a state. Felony, imprisonment from 5 years to life. Right?
So does that mean you can't commit treason if you're below the age of 18?
Well, you wouldn't be punished at this level.
Yeah.
Right. You need to be an adult. Right. Still can't rent a vehicle.
Yeah.
This world is really weird. It really is. All right, so where was I getting ready to go? Straight off. So you have 18 years of age, directly or indirectly, 5 years to life. Oh, that's total crap. Treason. Okay. What's the difference there between terrorism and treason? Any ideas?
It'd obviously be your intent. I guess one is to more inflict terror, and one is to, I guess, achieve a. I guess in the definition, whether to overthrow the government, maybe.
Talent, purpose.
And the manner in which you do it. Because terrorism generally, or it involves killing people. Treason to kind of slides.
Yeah, you can have a coup d'etat, things like that. Yeah. Usually the people die with that one too, though. Yeah, that's at least if they don't die, I mean, they at least, where's them go to the farm kind of thing. You ever hear from them again? The dog eats better ones. Trophy's doing well. Yeah, so it's basically we start getting into here is to some degree it's that intent. It kind of aligns, right? So you can have someone who's moving, is a treason. Well, what I would say is first step, to whom do you belong? Right? If it's domestic, you're right here, right? Domestic terrorism, if you are a terrorist who is homegrown, those actions there, if they're trying for that specific purpose, if they have a larger purpose than one specific action, it might be right there. Right? To some degree, it's that method, it's that fear that's instilled in a large audience. So size. Here, first thing, one of the things you look at are the different ways that people classify. This is just one scheme for categories for terrorism. Right? There are different schemes for different categories you can break up and talk about these same types of things in different ways. The ways that this one's broken up: civil, political, non-political, quasi, limited, and then official. Right? Civil disorder is that low end. violent forms of protests, groups of individuals, whatever, political actions, right? So depending on our thresholds, it's like any group that we deem as causing disorder. What's disorder? Is it that noise? Is it the litter? Is it a fire? Is it death? That kind of thing. Realize, what was it, 4 years ago? I remember having all those riots. It's like, was it like 20 something, 30 something people died? I think that first night, was it George Floyd? That first night when they had riots, there was a building caught fire. Someone died that very first night. So it's like, right off the bat, there's deaths associated with it. You have that relative side though. So it's, how is it good for society, bad for society? And how is it we decide to look at it, I guess? I don't know. And so that's one of those things. It's like there are lines that can be played quite a bit. That's the danger. Political, that's no straightforward. One political faction against the other. Non-political, religious usually is what you're talking about. Quasi, it says here, violent acts that utilize the same methods, but not motivated the same way. Civilians held hostage to help someone escape, that kind of a thing. Political, not to overthrow the government, but protest a policy or specific action that limited political terrorism. Biggest one there, state terrorism. Violent action executed by any existing government to achieve a particular goal. Most often this goal involves conflict with another country. It's one of those things. It's kind of funny that you look at it that way, because it's in some way the way we look at history, some way it's not. If you look at the number of deaths associated with government in general, have I talked about that in here? Okay, so that's a number. They just tried to put a phrase to it a few years back. I started hearing the word democide. Like, I don't like it. But basically, we start looking at is sum total of all wars, sum total of all deaths, and then if you look at the number of deaths that have been population, government killing its own population, that number starts getting pretty close to those in all wars. Like, that's a scary thing to think about, because that also would fall into that kind of place, because why are they killing people like that? That's terrorism. If you want to really think about it, think about those major, what would you say, changes, like in some outside countries where you see tens of millions of people dead, that kind of thing. That's also this to some degree. Some degree it's inefficiency. Some degree it's people trying to take power. So it's a power grab. Objectives, strategies, tactics. And here it mentions attention, harm relationships, damage economy, public order, all those types of things, strategies. Here it says security, an economy create distrust, ability to maintain control. That's true. Let's see, sympathy and support by positive action. So you can change where people put their power. See what else? Damaging hated foreign interests, harming international positions of interest for existing regime, physical damage, those kinds of things. What do I want to say there? Fear. Well, so one of my classes, I can't remember if it was this one or the other one, we started talking a little about terrorism stuff in here. So I think I'll mention it in here. If I ever mention the name Anwar al-Awlaki, good family name. Not a good family, no, terrorist family. The good example though, because what it is they're United States citizens. I can pull up their information. What it does is it starts to show how that line that is drawn with this word right here, right? It's like we draw lines all over the place with law. I mean, it's like you got that speech and words. How many places did we criminalize it because it can cause this? Not because it itself is necessarily violent. It can be threatening, though. That's a different thing. You start getting threats, harassment, abuses there. It's like, okay, then you are over here. Can that happen with these words that incite? Yeah, yes, but it's not the same thing as physical violence. That's why we draw lines there. It's still bad, not the same thing. on from that one. When we start looking at the ways in which we, I guess, can harm society around us. And then we look at the worst crimes of, I guess, morality, I guess would be a way to look at it. I mean, this is the only one that's in the Constitution, right? We look at this type of crime, what type of social negativity is ascribed to it? If you look at that, like a lot. Called someone who's an American citizen a terrorist. To some degree, that will justify their deaths, right? Because that's what it's supposed to do. That's why we would do it. That's why we have to make those determinations. So it's kind of a cyclical thing. U.S. citizen outside of this country. Actually, I might pull it up a little bit because it's always it's a really good story because it makes a really good example. Let's see here. Share screen. Boom. 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 Look, there it is. So here's the guy himself. We'll use, it's not going to show it to me. All right, so we'll use Wikipedia because it's free. Okay. Lecturer, jihadist, killed in 2011, U.S. government drone strike. President Obama, right? No trial, no nothing. Right, U.S. citizen. You'd think you'd have a trial for him or something. U.S. citizen. You're killing U.S. government's killing us. So that's a bit of a problem because they're born in Mexico. They're not here when it happens, though, so I guess that's what makes it okay. When you start looking at it, children, 16-year-old also died in that drone strike. He is also a citizen. Okay. Half sister. Oh, this one's a different one. Different political line. It doesn't matter the political lines. It really doesn't. What happened with this one was raid. Who was it they were going after? Unintended fatality. Right? Also, does it give born? Yeah, didn't give location. Also, United States citizen. Right? And so those numbers kind of get close. What is interesting to see, though, is its application and how we use it. So once that title attaches itself, the ways that society works changes, the way the governmental system itself changes, and the way people look at you change, right? So that's a completely different image than what you're used to seeing, because that's part of this thing too. Most will think of the stereotypical kind of images you see. Yeah, sometimes they look like that. Yeah, let's see if I've got this in here because that'd make it actually really easy. I wouldn't have to look anything up. Let's go. Hit you threat. How about this threat tag? Here we go. Okay, this one's a couple years ago. So some of this stuff won't just apply here; it'll apply a little bit wider out. Boom. There's one. This is a couple years ago. This was, if I remember correctly, there was a whole bunch of stuff that was happening here. This is, what county was this? I'll try to remember the backstory here. Idaho. That's not giving me the details I want right at the top. So I'll tell you a little bit about it. Basically, what this is about is it says here that the Attorney General had, I don't know if that's, I don't track those things close enough. Never called parents domestic terrorists. What had happened was there were a number of, I guess you'd say, school board meetings where parents were not happy and were quite outraged. Related to some of those communications, hostile in nature, the school board at least some of its members reached out to the federal government, identifying it's like, well, the nature of this technically might be considered terrorism. Right, because they're having this with this specific purpose, is to make some type of specific governmental action. Right? These people were investigated as terrorists. They were not called domestic terrorists. But if you look in this article here, what it'll tell you is that edu threat. Look at the word threat. Threat. Now there you go. Specifically, the counterterrorism created a threat tag edu officials to track instances of related threats. If they're likely applied that threat tag to investigations. Yeah, so that means that those people were all investigated as such. So what is it? They blurred the line there. So that way people can say, well, they weren't ever called terrorists. No, that they were investigated as such. They were never charged as such, right? So what does that mean? To some degree, that they were actively investigated by the federal government. For what? For going and talking to the school board, maybe saying some heated words. Is that the line that we're going to draw? What happens whenever you are found to be a terrorist? Where is that line at? Right? How hostile my words need to be before the next thing I know, rights are suspended. That's how that works. To know how it works more widely, there's another one I like to show you too. Yeah, that's about the daughter. Where is it? Military age men. Don't do that. Just open it up. So there you go. That's not just under Obama. That's from there forward. That's just an old article, is what it is. Anytime you have those types of things across the world, basically the way that they do their kill counts, the casualties. If you're a male between the ages of such and such and such and such, you are considered enemy combatant, military age male. So we don't have to claim you as an innocent because you could have been a fighter. See how that works? That's a bit interesting. U.S. drone attack on marriage procession in Yemen. What is this one? Oh, I didn't load all of it. I'll probably put that in there for some reason. Never called them domestic terrorists. Yeah, that's enough about that stuff, though. We'll move back to the slideshow so you can see how that stuff works overall. So you can see that it's a really great territory, right? You have to deal with the danger there. Going in and dealing with it's not going to be great. As you go in and deal with it, it might get even worse. And then as that happens, guess what happens to everyone around who sees it? Right? You know, with those instances, any area where they've seen that or they had personal attachment to any of those people there, it's like, what are the odds that, hey, you just made that a whole lot worse for them? You're more likely to instill. Okay, so it's a really difficult thing to deal with. Here it mentions victims. It mentions one of the interesting sides here, Stockholm syndrome. That's one where if you're in someone's care for a long enough period of time, you become sympathizer. It's one of those things that's actually a survival mechanism kind of thing. Is really what it ties into. Yeah, the more compliant you are, the more likely you are to live. Right. Here it mentions weapons of mass destruction. That's one that was probably more important to talk about a few years back because that was kind of there's a lot of governmental actions related to those. Yeah, any destructive device, explosive device, any weapon designed to cause basically death, serious injury through biological toxins, all those types of things. Okay. Next up, cyber terrorism, all those areas. So think about all the different areas, all the different ways that these things can be taking place. Realize that to some degree, it's the same nature that you see in crime itself. Right? The low level stuff's pretty easy to ignore. The higher level stuff, the more serious stuff's a little harder to ignore. If I said low level stuff, what would be a good example? You guys ever had any of those issues where you can go pick your phone and it's not working? That kind of stuff. What do you think that is? That's to some degree, it's sometimes it's an attack, right? Those systems are literally attacked from time to time, so that's why they go down. So you have to pay attention when those are attacks, where it's just errors. Sometimes those are just straight attacks. Um, hmm, let's see, what would be a good example? Um, this one was from probably a couple years back now. Whenever they're having, maybe it's a year ago, Ukraine, all that stuff, people hacking into some of their systems there. They realized that some of the same programs that they were using over there were used here. As a result, some of our, I think it's a power station, something like that, got hacked here. What is it? That's cyber terrorists, right? That's where they're doing it for that specific purpose. They're engaged in those types of things, and we're a friend to an adversary, right? And so that's the kind of stuff you start getting into. Um, mm, mm, mm. Oh, in terms of destruction, weapons of mass destruction. I got two other things I want to ask you about, something to think about. Okay. Usually people think about things like COVID and that kind of stuff. It's like, I don't think that that would be one just because of the damage it did, right? If you really want to get like conspiracy theories and things like that, I'll talk about that real briefly. It's because of the amount of damage that did to the Chinese themselves. If you look at whenever it took place, um, kind of to give an idea for it, when it first broke out at what was it, the beginning of 2020 and 2019. First real news that we heard stateside was when they built like 4 hospitals in 3 days. 4 hospitals, big facilities, because they're having that much of an issue. We'd be more likely to see something to be low level resolution where it's actually passed off as something else, right? What's that stuff with fentanyl, right? You have someone who's dealing with drugs, that kind of a thing. What happens if you go to try to help them? You guys ever seen anybody pass down on fentanyl, dying, overdosing, anything like that? Hopefully not. God, I hope not. Try not to. And if you see someone who looks like they're doing something like that, whether it's like a seizure, passing out, could be diabetes, could be that. Today's world, you can't just walk up to that window, can you? You shouldn't. Why? Because if that's something like that in the mix, you roll down that window, that might be your death right there. What is that? That's being sent over here for specific places to make money, yes, but also it destroys the society to some degree. You now can't just go be a good Samaritan without jeopardizing your life. What is that? Same kind of thing, right? So how we classify this, what we label as matters. And to some degree, it's a lot more pervasive than what people think. Here it talks about biological assault, biochemical terrorism, financial institutions, so all the different areas you can hit, whether it's money, whether it's basic infrastructure like electricity, specific facilities like hospitals, or whether it's something more widestream like something biological, chemical, or other type of weaponry, physical. Boom. Is that the last one of that one? It is. All right. So what else do I need to talk about in here? So we'll talk about in terms of major governmental actions on the side. So most of this major changes related to terrorism picks up in 2001. You guys know why. I'm going to talk about all that stuff. What you need to realize is that most of the changes that happened related to structure of the government actually instituted almost immediately. It wasn't for another year. I think they put forward the was it Patriot Act, I want to say, that no, it might have been that one because I think that one went out later. It was later in that year. No, it was the following year. And so that's the one that formalized those changes. Basically, what happened was the if you go back and look at it, because most of this information is actually fairly publicly accessible, you can see how much information related to what was it, Al Qaeda, how much information was available to them at the different branches, and how self-evident it should have been that that was taking place. Right, that's something effective like 2 or 3 years beforehand. They were aware of bin Laden himself trying to train people to fly planes into buildings, right? It's years in advance. And so it's like, you should have been watching that one. But hindsight's 2020 and diversions, I should say diversions. It was the distribution of that intelligence across the different areas and everybody wanting to get it, I guess. That led to some information not being shared as best. That formed the Department of Homeland Security. Here, when he starts talking about some of these other changes, borders change. What else do I want to tell you there? When it comes to these types of actions, so you have the Patriot Act was the first one. Realize that most of those acts, sometimes they'll give themselves powers. A lot of the powers that were within the Patriot Act were ones that had to be renewed. So they have a sunset clause in them. You guys ever heard of a sunset clause before? No. Okay, so sunset clause is just a time frame for when it's going to, like you have a time frame it is enacted, and then you have a time frame whenever it's no longer in place. And by default, that's kind of the way they do a lot of things. So that way they renew it. So that way it's purifying. Yeah, it can be. It depends. It really depends on the purpose there. Like I said, it really depends. You have multiple generations of it is what you get. So like warfare, there's multiple generations. The farther out you get, the harder it is to see. That's why I start out with such a far picture of it, where it's something so removed, but it still does the same thing. We don't classify it as such. Let's see, what was I just talking about before I took that forward? Sunset clauses. Good, best example of that. You guys ever heard of the 1994 weapons control bill? I had one person shaking their head, yes.
Was that the magazine capacity and like
Yes.
flash hiders and stuff?
Yes. So in the 1994, that was President Clinton under his era. Passed congressional act, and what it did is it outlawed magazines over a certain number. If you had a rifle that had X number of characteristics, you couldn't have that. So it'd be like a flash hider, pistol grip, and let's see, what else was there?
Collapsible stock, I think.
Yeah, collapsible stock. And there were more than that actually. It'd be something like, is there a heat shield on it? Like you got a shotgun or something. And so there's a whole bunch of stuff in there like that. Where it was they were trying to regulate firearms to reduce crime, because crime was really going up at that time. Weapons were really, really cheap. To kind of give you an idea for how cheap they are. You could find what would be a standard AK-47, because the time frames AK-47 is more common, cheaper. You can get them for less than $200 each, right? And so it's like that's what you're dealing with there, and that's new, right? That's not like, hey, I got this from off the street that had been used for something. It's like, you can get those things real cheap. Basically, what they found after the fact was that lasted for 10 years, so 2004 when it sunset. At that point in time, different administration did not renew it, right? And so those powers lapsed. Those characteristics were no longer being regulated in the way that they are, so they became more popular again. Over here, what you have is it's those powers that they have to be regularly renewed. So you'll have the Patriot Act, right? About 6 to 7 years later, you'll have the Freedom Act, right? And what it'll do is it'll go back in those authorities, those powers it gave, like I can't remember if I put it in the notes or not, but there's ones like probably most commonly roving wiretaps, right? You got a cell phone, you're calling. I get a warrant for it to listen in on it. Okay, it's a burner. I got a new phone. Do I need to go get a new warrant, or I just transfer over to the new phone? And so with technology, it's really just pick up the new number, right? And you don't have to go through all those processes again, because that would really slow you down. And so some of those things are really good. Some of those are less so, like that bulk metadata collection kind of stuff. That's not so good. And so balancing that out is difficult, because Congress doesn't like to reduce its powers. Usually it's one of those things that doesn't happen, so we're going to keep renewing it. And so that's still going on. So here it's topped off with, what was it? Enhanced Border Security 2002. Yeah, Preparedness Response Act of 2002, getting into that kind of stuff. So here's our act. The long one, and it doesn't even have all of it. It even covers hoaxes, right? Yeah, like willful conduct, simulate active terrorism as a joke, hoax, prank, trick against place, population, business, agency, or government by potential use of a substance to cause fear, intimidation, reasonable victim may be used. What kind of thing are they talking about? Use of a substance for fear.
It's threats.
Is it
How-
like,
Go ahead.
sorry, is it like when like COVID was a big thing and people were like threatening to spit on people in like that kind of way?
Ooh, I hadn't thought about that one. That one might, you might be able to get an argument there for that one. What I was going for was like, how many times you guys hear in the news where it's, someone received an envelope full of a powdery white substance, right? Like, okay, this isn't Johnny Depp, so it's not going to be a good time. This is going to be anthrax, right? Is it real anthrax or is it just a threat? Sometimes it's the real thing. Sometimes they're just doing it to be assholes, right? And so now we can go after them. So that's where that comes in. We almost out of time. Almost. All right. Here it mentions what else? Terrorism activity, plans, transactions. See, I actually cut it off a little bit because it was too long. And so you get a good idea for how terrorism starts to work here, how the statutes work. You're talking about the different means through which it uses, the fact that it's about fear, the fact that it has some type of purpose that you're trying to instill in others. It's not just that fear. To some degree, it's that power that's associated with it, but they won't necessarily enumerate it in that way. They've got to identify the ways in which people are trying to seek it, because that's all it is. It's at the heart of it. All right. Any questions or anything? No? All right. Well, I guess that kind of wraps it up for today. We'll pick up next time with what is next? That was 9. I think we'll start getting into the drug stuff after this. Let me take a look. Boom. This is Crim. All courses, because I don't remember how far I've gone into it. We'll go with an old one. Here's an old one. Boop. 8, 9. So that was part 8 and 9. So in part 10, we move into, this should be drugs, if I remember correctly. Yes, drug abuse and drug trafficking. Excellent. So this is a lot of fun, because here's where we'll start going back through the issues with status offenses, the issues with drugs, the issues with regulating it. And then we'll tie into some of the ways in which society is changing, like, for example, the 2018 here, the medical marijuana stuff, because that should change everything, but how much does it actually change? You already get pulled over with some substance you shouldn't have. What should you say? What should you do? I can't tell you those things. That'd be bad advice. Don't ever get pulled over with those things. It'd be bad on you. No, it's kind of funny though. I'll spoil the plot on that one. That's one where if you look at the statutes as they're written, basically, if you have a medical reason for which you're using it, you can actually cite it right there. The punishments associated with that type of action drastically change. They drastically drop down. And so it's one of those things. We'll get into it and we'll talk about that next time, and probably the next class after that. Because part will be about the abuse, the use, and the other part will be trafficking. So it takes a little bit to go through that one. But with that, I'll bid you all adieu for today. Have a good one. Have fun. Good Monday. All right. Did I drone on for too long? No. Good. You guys feel like you learned something? Okay. I feel like I've done my job today. I'm going home now. No, wait, I got other classes too. All right. See y'all later.